All right, good morning, everyone. This is Mr. Mountjoy. Today we're going to be talking about how can I write an equation for an exponential function using two input-output pairs. So 2 points on the graph, that's what that means. How can I write an exponential equation or exponential function if I was giving 2 points on the graph, even when they're not one space apart? Okay, so let's go ahead and dig into this question and let's look at the graph. So here is a graph representing the function in the form g of x equals a times b to the x power. How could we write an exponential function for this graph here? Well, we're going to have to find a few things. The first thing we're going to have to find is we're going to have to know what's the growth factor, and we're also going to need to know what's the y-intercept. Now, in this problem, they were super nice to us, and they showed us where the graph hits the y-intercept. They showed us that the graph hits the y-intercept at 0, 300. So what did they just tell us? They told us the y-intercept right here. And so that is our value a in our function, right? So in the function g of x equals a times b to the x power, we already know a. We know a is 300. Now that we know A, we can find B using some information that they gave us. So they gave us also this other point, 1.5, comma, 153.6. So what does this mean for us? So this means that in our function, so if I look at the function g of x equals A was 300 times B to the x power, they gave us 2 points. They gave us, if I plug in 1.5 in for x, I get 153.6. So if I plug in 1.5 into this function, this whole thing needs to equal 153.6. Okay, so now I'm able to solve this. I'm ready to go. I have the ability to now solve this function based off of that input point, right? So let's go ahead and figure out what this would be. So the first thing we got to do is divide both sides by 300 to solve, right? We're going to divide by 300, divide by 300. And so I end up with b to the 1.5 is equal to, let me get my calculator so I can divide this. I get 0.512. Okay, so I just divided 153.6 by 300, and I got 0.152. Now, how would I solve this from here? Well, if I remember, something raised to the 1.5 power is really raised to the 3/2 power. Right? Let me write that a little nicer. To the 3/2 power. Okay, and this is equal to 0.512. So if I want to undo cubing it and then taking the square root, right? That's what 3/2 means. I need to use the inverse of that. So what's the opposite of cubing something and then doing the square root? Well, that would be to raise this to the 2/3 power, right? The reciprocal of that. And I'll do the same over here. So whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. And something nice happens. B to the 3/2 raised to the 2/3 is equal to B. And now I can type in into my calculator 0.512 raised to the 2/3. And so after I calculate that, that's going to give me 0.64. Okay, so what I've just done there is I've plugged in this point 1.5 comma 5.3.6 or 153.6 into my function, and I solved for b. Now I know a and b, and so I can finish writing my function. My function is going to look like this. G of x is equal to a was 300 times b, which was 0.64, raised to the x power. Okay, so there's my work there that shows all my steps on how to solve for this. And now I can take some notes here. So how did we find the growth factor? So what did we do to find this? Well, we plugged in 1.5 comma 153.6 into the function. See that? And solve for b. So that's what we did. And we said that b was equal to 0. How did we find the y-intercept? We looked where g of x cross the y-axis at 0, 300. So a is equal to 300. That was our y-intercept. So what was our function again? Our function was 300 times 0.64 raised to the x power. Okay. So not too bad. All you have to do is look for a few different pieces of information. The first place is you got to find the y-intercept. That's important. So find your a. Once you know that, all you have left in your function is b, and then you can solve your function for b. Okay, so that's the process for using 2 points on a graph in order to find the equation. So just by knowing the graph, 2 points on the graph, I was able to figure out the equation 300 times 0.64 raised to the x power. Now, I want to really stress this. This is very similar to what you would do when you were given 2 points on a linear line, and you would find the slope and the y-intercept, and then you would write that in the form of y equals mx plus b. So it should feel very familiar to you. The only part that's a little more difficult is finding b. B is the harder one because you're having to use inverse operations with exponents. All right, so we have another problem. This one represents h of x, but this time we don't have a spot where it crosses the x-axis, or the y-axis. We don't know the y-intercept. So the points that they gave us are -1, 9, and 3, 16 over 9. So we got a little bit more work to do on this one because they did not give us the y-intercept right from the beginning. So we're going to have to figure out this now. One of the things we can do is if they don't give us the y-intercept, we might have to calculate the growth factor first. And it turns out you can calculate the growth factor without knowing a. So let's find out how to do that. So the first thing I want to point out here is really what is a growth factor. So a growth factor is the thing that you can multiply by over and over and over again in order to get an exponential function. So if you remember in the passport photo problem, we were shrinking it by 80%. So we kept multiplying by 0.8, and then 0.8 again, and then 0.8 again. And every time we multiplied by 0.8, we were able to get a new step in our problem. So, well, let's think about how many steps are being taken to get from -1 to +3. So we're right here at -1, and we're going all the way over to +3. So if I think about this, if I multiply by the growth factor one time, it gets me to the y-intercept. If I multiply 2 times, I'm right here. If I multiply 3 times, I'm right here. And then if I multiply a 4th time, I'm at this last point here. So I've multiplied by the growth factor 4 times. Okay? And so let's really understand what's happening. So my starting place, we don't know where the y-intercept is, but we know that if you're starting at -1 comma 9, if you're starting at 9 and you multiply by the growth factor 4 times, that will get you to that other point on the other side, 16 over 9. So starting here and then going over the growth factor 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, if I multiply by it 4 times, I get 16 over 9. Okay, so that is what's happening with our growth factor right now. Well, now I have something that has b in it, and I can now solve this. Okay, so if I want to solve for b, I just need to solve this equation right here for b. So how would I solve this? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of clean this up a little bit. This is equal to 9 times b to the 4th power is equal to 16 over 9. And so to solve this, I'm going to divide both sides by 9. And so this will give me b to the 4th is equal to 16 over 81. And so I'm getting close. Now I want to undo raising it to the 4th power. The way that you do that is by doing the 4th root. So I'm taking the 4th root. And so I get b on the left side. And this is a little bit trickier on the right side. But the cool thing about fractions is that you can split them into exponents, their exponents like this. So it's really 16, the 4th root of 16 over the 4th root of 81. And so I'm asking myself, what times itself 4 times is equal to 16? That's 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. And then what times itself 4 times equals 81? And that's 3. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, times 3 is 81. So this whole thing simplifies to b equals 2/3. And that is my growth factor. So my growth factor is 2/3. And I was able to find that by just knowing that 9 times the growth factor 4 times equals 19 over 6. And I was just able to get that from the graph. I counted over, I saw that going over 4 spaces would go from 9 to 16 over 9. Okay? Now, how can I use this now to find the y-intercept? Well, just like in the last problem, we can just solve for h of x for a point. Okay, so h of x is equal to a times 2/3 to the x power. That's our function. We don't know a right now, so I can use either -1/9 or 3 comma 16 over 9. Either is fine. I like using -1/9 because it seems like they're whole numbers. So h of -1 is equal to a times 2/3 to the x power, and this, not to the x power, to the -1st power is equal to 9. Right, I'm plugging in my values into this function. So if I'm going to solve this, I want to solve for a. So what I should realize is that I'm multiplying by 2/3 to the -1 power, so I should divide both sides by 2/3 to the -1 power. Okay, so this simplifies nicely. I end up with a is equal to 9 divided by, what's the inverse of 2/3? That's 3/2. And then I can use keep, change, flip because I'm doing 9 divided by 3/2, which is really 9 times 2/3. That simplifies really nicely. Almost done. So 9 times 2 is 18, divided by 3 is 6. So a is equal to 6. just by doing some division there. All right, so I found b is 2/3, and I found a is 6. So now I can write my equation. So my equation, let's go ahead and plug this in here. My equation is a, which is 6, times b, which was 2/3, raised to the x power. And there is my function for this exponential graph. Okay, so how did we find the growth factor? So remember what we did was we figured out that 9 times b, the growth factor 4 times, equals 16/9. We looked at our two values and we found that 9 times our growth factor 4 times is equal to 16/9. And we solved for b. Okay, so we ended up with b equals 2/3. To find the y-intercept, we plugged in -1, 9 into the equation. And solved for a. And we got a equals 6. So our final equation, h of x is equal to 6 times 2/3 to the x power.